Hello, everyone. Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore, and welcome to the Music Masterclass. So, for anyone who's new here, welcome so much. And what we do is, I don't know, I talk about making music, creating music, composing, arranging, that sort of thing. And I usually have like some words of my own to start off with. And then we look at some of the music that you've all been creating in the last week, and I give some of my feedback, and we have whatever kind of discussion we might want to have about it. So this is all brought to you by the Mastering MuseScore School. I pinned the link up to the top. Please check it out and check out all the courses that I offer, where you can get tons of information on basic theory, on harmony, and now on counterpoint that I'm working on. So that's my commercial. Highly recommended you check out the courses. Um, Okay, so one of the things that I said I wanted to talk about today is we've been doing this little, I'm just checking the chat, make sure all is well. Hello, everyone. Um, so, by the way, I saw comments about refresh. Well, that's browser specific. F5 is Chrome's refresh command. I think it's Internet Explorer's also. Can't speak for any other browser, so it totally depends on your browser. Um, but yeah, there's usually a refresh somewhere. So we've been doing this little challenge that that came up a couple weeks ago, where we were talking about one of my compositions, and I was talking about improvising over that chord progression, and it kind of morphed from there to a discussion of creating a new melody, like actually composing a new melody to an existing chord progression. And I'm gonna get this thing back up here. There we go. So, so I want to continue talking about that because we do have at least one other new submission since the last time that since last week when we looked at some of these. But I also wanted to talk about the reverse, because the reverse is actually something that I do a lot more often. Um, Taking an existing melody and putting a new chord progression to it. So this is something that I do. Um, yeah, I do it often. So as a jazz pianist, I do it on the fly. I mean, I'll be playing some song. Typically, these are like songs from, say, the 1940s or whatever. They were pop songs then, but they're jazz standards now. Often they're show tunes or movie themes. And, I'll play the song, and every time you play through that melody, that same melody might occur if it's an A form. You might have the same 8 measures of melody happens 3 times in there. And then we start improvising over that chord progression. So that 8 bar chord progression that forms the A section, I might play, more than 10 times over the course of a performance of that piece. I'm not going to play it the same way every time. I guarantee it. I'm going to be making changes. Sometimes they're subtle changes, but sometimes I'll make more extreme changes. Some of those more extreme changes I can't make on the fly. I will work them out ahead of time if I feel like I really want to take it to kind of another level. And so I do want to talk a little bit about that process. Um, and one of the reasons it came up is so my wife teaches elementary school music, and she wrote a song for the school. This is the school song for Carson Elementary School. And she wrote it to be fairly simple, just a melody and, well, she wrote yeah, she wrote it to be a fairly simple melody with fairly simple chords to it, knowing full well that it would be possible, and she's a jazz pianist also, to do more with it. So I want to play you a version of that as kind of as it was originally here. So this is the sheet music version with like a piano accompaniment that we might use accompanying the kids singing this song. And I'll just play a little bit of it. So I can hear already that the chord symbol playback is turned on. I want to actually disable that. So give me a moment. All right. Going on. So extremely simple piano accompaniment, right? This is designed to be really simple for a harried music teacher to just pound out on the piano while trying to keep all the kids in line and not have to think very hard about it. So realistically, she doesn't play it that simply, probably ever. She's doing a little more with it than that. But this is sort of this simple piano accompaniment we came up with. Um, what happened, well, 2 years ago, uh, was they had a guest saxophone quartet performance. In other words, a professional saxophone quartet. They're members of the Air Force Academy band there. They have their saxophone quartet, and they came and did a performance. And we sort of had this idea that we could write a saxophone quartet arrangement of the school song for them to perform. And it was a lot of fun. They did it and they performed it with the kids singing along, but the performance was entirely too fast. I mean, it sounded great. The saxophone sounded great there, but the kids were way out of sync with what was happening there. So, and it was just a noisy environment. So that's not necessarily a good recording to hear. But I do want to put on, just because I can, the recording of they made a separate recording for us of just them playing it. And I want to play that for a moment so that y'all can hear how it sounded. But now I'm wondering why I'm not finding it, because it should be in here. I had this up just the other day. There we go. Oh, I see. Yeah, it's here on MuseScore.com with the. Do I have? But I don't have that hooked up to the playback. Huh. Uh, 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 uh. It should be showing up here, but it's not. So I guess we're not going to hear the actual saxophones doing it, unfortunately. But we will hear MuseScore doing it. So a little bit of this. And what you'll recognize is this is the example I put in my newsletter. In other words, I simplified it. I didn't put all these rhythms. I just went bum, 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 bum as my melody. And I actually put C chords in the middle of the measure because that's how we often might play it. For the saxophone quartet version, I made a much more complex harmonization. So the idea that there's a lot more chords there. If you're going to write an arrangement of a song, now you have the ability to put as many chords in there as you want, or as many as your mastery of the harmonic language allows you to put in there. And so again, a little commercial alert: my harmony course, everything that I do here is all the straight out of the harmony course. It's all kind of by the book stuff. Um, so it's a very useful technique if you ever want to take a simple song and arrange it for any sort of ensemble. Chances are you are not going to want to have the really simple chords that were there originally, because it just won't be as satisfying in an arrangement to hear just one chord for 8 measures, or this really simple back and forth F C F C. It was a simple thing to pound on the piano, but when you have the ability to arrange for these instruments, you have the ability to then come up with passing chords and all sorts of other things to make this more complex. So the idea that you might take a simple melody that originally had simple chords and add your own chords to it that have their own logic to it, um, is definitely something that's it's just a huge part of what it means to arrange songs, and that's something that's been discussed in the community lately, is the idea of taking a song that maybe started from a lead sheet and arranging it for an ensemble of some kind. And in doing that, my advice is, don't feel limited by the chords you see on paper. That was just one person's impression of what chords they thought might be appropriate to play once. But again, in actual performance, it's expected that those chords will be different. And in particular, if you think about, like, when I said these songs, often the songs that are like played by jazz musicians, they were maybe show tunes from the 40s or 50s. In the show, it wouldn't be the same harmony every time, right? That A section might show up, three times in the AABA form, but then there might be a little dance break, right? And in the dance break, um, they might have that same melody being played, but with different chords. And then there might be a key change, and then they might bring the melody back in, but with the other, the man sang it the first time. Now it's the woman singing it with slightly different lyrics. And all of that kind of stuff is you don't just reuse, you don't just copy and paste those same eight measures, right? You reimagine how it's going to work, and sometimes it's just a different orchestration but the same harmonization. But very often you take advantage of the possibility of putting new chords in. So yeah, I would say this is your new challenge, to take a song that you that has nice simple melody and chords, and put your own harmonization to it. Now, you can certainly do, when putting your own melody to an existing chord progression, my sense is that most people have enough of an innate sense of what a melody is that you can do that without knowing anything. I'm doing the air quotes thing a lot here. About how to make a melody. Most people, though, don't have as innate of a sense of how to put chords uh, together in a way that will make harmonic sense. And that's why things like my harmony course, or any of a million websites and things or books that are out there that try to explain harmony, that can tell you why things like what I do here, that's a two chord suspension. So in the key of F, that's a G chord with a suspension here, because this is a C resolving to the third. So we have a G7, then 5, 1. So it's 2, 5, 1, but the 2 chord is a dominant 7th chord with a suspension, 4 resolving to 3. That's all really kind of standard stuff. I didn't make that up. All I had to do was grab it out of my grab bag of, maybe 2 dozen devices like that I can easily put a name to and describe. Oh yeah, that's a 251 with a secondary dominant and a suspension. That's 251 is one device, secondary dominant's another device, suspension's another one. So I took 3 well-known devices and just combined them in what frankly is a pretty well-known, commonly used way. So knowing what those devices are really helps you put things together in ways that make sense. It's sort of like if you want to build, say, a house. Yeah, you could just buy raw lumber and nails and glass, and then build the entire house that way. But probably you want to buy a prefabricated door, because you don't want to waste your time building your own door or building your own window. You buy a prefabricated window. Maybe you buy instead of buying raw lumber and cutting your own 2x4s out of it, well, you buy 2x4s. Well, I guess that's raw lumber too, but you know what I mean? It's like pre-cut in sort of standardized ways. So most harmony works in these sort of standardized ways. I do want to say, not all harmony. And so I am going to switch now for the moment and uh, take a listen to a score that uses harmony in completely not standard ways, so that we can hear something that's totally outside this world. And I think it sounds great. But then so I want to make a distinction. I don't want to say one has to use these sort of prefabricated harmonic things. There's a lot of great music that can be made without that. So I am going to start this piece playing, and I have Parsa, I think. I don't know if you're here, but that's the name of the composer. I guess he didn't put it in here. So let's listen to this. And meanwhile, I'm still going to see if I can find that video because it's fun. Yeah, I really like that piece. I really think it fits, the mood of the poem really well. And I'm looking at Parso's comments here to try to maybe decipher some of the things that are going on. I'm going to pop up the chat over here. Um, so yes, what's going on here is a completely personalized approach to harmony, right? It's not using the standard 2-5-1 kinds of progressions. And yet, the sounds individually, like if I look at the sound right here, that sound I could look at and say, okay, there's a G in the bass, there's a B and a G here, and a seventh there. That's a G7, right? Okay, that's a G7. But what it does from there, it's a collection, this little cluster of notes, right? With a second on top and then kind of a sixth below, right? A second here and then a sixth below. It's a particular shape that's moving around. And the motion of that shape is not really trying to tell me that this is one chord and that is another chord and this is a different chord. It's more about, hey, let's move this shape around. Now, at some level, this all has a G7 quality to it in that has a G7 quality to it while the bass moves from the 1 to the 5. And yet, so it might start off giving you a sense that okay, it's going to be, fairly conventional harmonically but with some interesting voicings. But it isn't, because I mean, having the A in the bass there, this doesn't have anything in particular harmonic to it. In other words, it's not telling me it's an A chord, I don't think, an A minor chord, just because there happens to be an A and a C. It really is about moving those voicings around to create a mood. And then when we get into the next section, again, we hear, you know, shapes being moved around, and it's really about the moving of those shapes more than a particular harmonic context, although I can hear 4 1 of C, or and then maybe 1 with a sixth on it. It's possible to hear those things, but then I can't describe what's going on here in the same way. I mean, I can say that yes, at this point we have more of an A flat 7 sound, and then is that a G7 sound? Because I can my harmonic ear is telling me, oh, in the key of C, if I have an A flat 7 that's functioning as a augmented sixth chord or as a tritone substitution for 2, and I expect it to go to 5, and I now hear a sound here that has a B in it, so and it has an F in it, and that kind of sounds a little like G7, but there's no G, and this A is kind of out there. It's really more about the voice leading of what's moving around in here. So I feel like there's a sense of it coming from a place of harmony, of sort of traditional ways of looking at harmony, but not at all being limited to that, saying, hey, I know what some chords are, but let's make this all be about sounds. And I think this piece is doing this really well, while embracing some fairly dissonant sounds, right? I mean, the dissonance involved in some of these sounds is fairly. A lot of those are actually just kind of triads or seventh chords, but some of them are much more, clustery, for a lack of a better word. No, that's not one. But there were plenty in here that were. Yeah, here he's even put chord symbols in there. Yeah, that is an E7. So I don't even remember where the clustery ones were. Right? So there's interesting voice leading, all sorts of interesting things going on, but the melody is totally supporting that, and that the melody is not diatonic, right? That Carson theme song, or my piece for Dad, for that matter, is the melody is almost completely diatonic. So it supports traditional tonal ways of adding chords. If your melody, like the melody starts diatonic here, right? It's all note E of C until you hit this E flat. At this point, all bets are off. The melody doesn't stick. Like we have a E flat and an E natural within a beat or so of each other, and now we've got B flats happening, and then we have F sharps happening. We have E flats happening, C sharps happening, all sorts of other things going on just in the melody. I picked one note that I picked a couple notes that were in the accompaniment. I really should have been focusing on the melody, but all sorts of these passages, all sorts of these melody notes are not diatonic, and so the kinds of chord qualities that you can get um, by having a melody that's not diatonic, it's going to give you a language that's likely to move way outside the standard 251 world if your melody is as highly chromatic as this. So I'm assuming that Parsa wrote the melody and the chords together. That's my assumption here, and that it wasn't like a melody that he's like, now let me see if I can put chords to it. I think writing the melody and the chords together, then each sonority that got created, like at this point, now it's like, now let me figure out what note comes next and what harmony goes with it together based on the sound we just heard, based on the melody and the chord we just heard. This is realistically how I compose a lot of music that I don't specifically want to be tonal. So I'm calling this not tonal, right? I mean, it's not just doing, it's not sticking to a key and doing standard things within that key. And yet it's not atonal in the sense of being completely divorced from the world of triadic harmony. There's clearly triadic sounds happening in it. So it's what I would call non-tonal, is a term that I sometimes use for this type of sound. And so I think it's a successful version of non-tonal music. And that's realistically a lot of the music that I personally create is in that same sound. All right. So those those are some of my oh, Parsa's here. Yay. So cool. Yeah. So if there's anything else that you want to tell us about this, I saw your comments about shapes and things, and they're um, yeah, and that's what I see. I mean, you talked about limiting yourself to a certain number of shapes. Well, at the beginning, I mean, I see that specific one. Um, and I see that coming again there. So I see that you're reusing that shape. I'm going to guess maybe this little cluster is another one that you meant, where there's like a kind of a cluster of three notes together and then one above it. Although this G flat, if I respell it as F sharp, I see it's not really a cluster of three notes as much as it is two. It's basically a seventh chord, right? It's a seventh chord spelt funny. In fact, if I respell that one too, I can see it's B7. If I spell that one too, it's just B7. So sometimes it really does pay to think, if you're going to write something that really is just a chord, spelling it the appropriate way makes it way easier to see that it's just a chord, and then I'm going to find the notes there too. So that's just a fairly traditional B7 type of sound. But a lot of the other things that are happening, right? You've got, a cluster of two notes and then coming down to a third. Here you're using that same cluster of a second with a sixth below in the bass. So yeah, I see what you mean about taking a few specific shapes and saying, all right, I'm going to work with those and then see where they take me from a voice leading perspective. So yeah, so to me, these are both really useful things to be able to do. And when I say both, I mean the original thing that I did with the Carson song of taking it and just reinventing it harmonically. Like if I right off the bat, like let me even talk about what's going on here. I have a 1 chord, 4 chord, and that is flat 7, 6, and 6 is a dominant seventh chord because of the F sharp. Dominant 5, 1. So right there, I've already had secondary dominant. The D, secondary dominant. The G is a secondary dominant. The E flat is what in jazz terms we would call tritone substitution. I would have expected an A7 here, the secondary dominant for D. E flat 7 is a tritone away. So these are Hall concepts that get described in the harmony course, but they're out there. You just look up these terms: tritone substitution, secondary dominant, etc. So we in those first 8 bars we see secondary dominant and a tritone substitution. In the next 8 bars, here's a diminished chord, a secondary diminished chord, to use that language. And yeah, you'll find all the sort of techniques that, let's see, the last part's maybe the most complex in here. So let me just play this last little bit here. So in here, again, there's more secondary dominant. So all of these things are using these, prefabricated doors, prefabricated windows. So every single one of these techniques is one that's learnable, usable, and anyone who knows this language could create an arrangement very, very similar to this. Contrasting that, what Parsa has done here, no one else is going to create anything that sounds like this. This is Parsos language. And maybe it's not his permanent language. It's the language that he set up for himself, saying, you know what, I'm going to use these particular shapes. One of the shapes apparently is perfect fifths in both hands, because I see that happening again there. Actually, that one's not a perfect fifth. It's a tritone, but still, it's the shape of 2/5 across the hands. So, that was like a particular challenge he set up for himself. Hey, I want to develop a piece based on that sound. Well, there is no prefabricated window. There is no prefabricated thing you can go to Home Depot based on those specific shapes. This is a build it your own thing. You're going to end up with a house that looks unlike any other house on that block if you do this. And that's great. I think they're both fantastically useful things. You want to build a house that looks like it fits in with the other houses, and that maybe anyone else could have designed a house similar, and you put your own personal touch on it, sure, within the realm of conventional harmony. But it's also, and that is a huge skill. It takes a lot of effort to learn, but very, very worth it. This is also a skill that takes some effort to develop, But because there's no specific guidelines to follow, you will be your own teacher in developing this. And I absolutely positively recommend it. I recommend spending some time doing exactly this, developing pieces with, this type of really unique harmonic language where it's all your only one. So, yeah, the one low cluster. Yeah, and I was guessing that you had it, and I just saw right here. There's this low cluster, right? And darkest evening of the year, and then you give us that, right? That dark evening, right? So yeah, this is why I think all the sounds that you're using are very appropriate for the mood of the actual poem here. I saw Joanne was asking about going back and forth between 3 and 4. And yeah, that's actually one of these things that happens not uncommonly when writing pieces that are so free harmonically. They're likely to end up being pretty free rhythmically. If there's no specific harmonic structure locking you into 2-5-1s, then there's a pretty good chance there's not going to be a rhythmic structure locking you into 4 beats per measure. And you will have phrases that are longer than 4 beats or shorter than 4 beats, in which, yeah, you're just going to want to notate random time signature changes. And yeah, that's actually, I don't know that I ever thought about that really specifically before, but that's absolutely true. Like when I think of some of the pieces that I've written that maybe have a similar language to them, where they're kind of sort of based on some harmonic ideas, but not at all in these sort of traditional ways. So instead, they're my version of this language. Those pieces are the ones that are most likely to freely move back and forth between 3 and 4. Colleen, you may remember my piece Mystic Reverie. That's one of the pieces I have. And there's random 2-4 measures, random 3-4 measures, and things like that, because that's just how it phrases. So Joanne, yeah, it's possible you'll have to do this. My guess, from what I've heard of your music, you probably won't be doing this as often as you think. But yeah, it's totally legitimate. But if your music is more conventional harmonically, chances are it's more conventional rhythmically as well. And it's just a question of discovering the pattern. But yeah, you never know. You absolutely never know. And so, absolutely, you are free to be doing this sort of thing. So, in any case, I thought this was a really interesting piece to be looking at. And oh, just notate block chords with arpeggio. I didn't even notice that text marking in there before. So I guess you're just referring to the fact that you could have written that arpeggio like with 30-second notes, but no, you just wrote them as quarter notes and put an arpeggio marking on it, and that's totally fine. Um, so yeah, this is I think it would be really fun to hear this piece actually sung by someone, so we could actually hear the lyrics with it rather than just seeing them, because I think that would make a significant difference in how we perceive it. So looking at some more comments here. Oh yeah, lyrics can absolutely be the reason why you actually add beats here and there, but I will say most people who write music to existing lyrics give themselves the liberty of altering the lyric slightly to fit a metric pattern. So, like, I remember this came up recently, and I can't remember where it came up. It might have been during one of my office hour sessions that I do with the All Access members. Commercial alert, All Access members, check it out. It might have been there, might have been in one of the master classes, but there's a song that was really popular in the church that I went to growing up, and maybe some of you know it, that comes from the Prayer of St. Francis, which is normally translated into English as something like, um, Make me an instrument of your peace. Um, and when it was set to music, I'm sure someone has said it that way. Whatever word, because Prayer of St. Francis was probably written, I don't even know what language it was written in originally, actually. I have no idea. Would it have been written in Latin? Would it have been written in Greek? Would it have been written in some other language, Italian, or I don't even know. Don't know enough about Francis's background. Um, but Um, it's whatever word it is, it's, instrument is the translation you'll often see in English, but it doesn't roll off the tongue, right? So make me a channel of your peace is the pop song version of that, channel of your peace, instead of instrument of your peace. That way you didn't need to have this extra syllable in there, right? And that is completely accepted because realistically, instrument wasn't Francis's word anyhow. That was just a translation. Anything coming from the Bible, unless you're writing it in what portions of the Bible were originally written in Greek, portions in various other languages. So I'm not the biblical scholar. Heist could comment on that more. But if you're working off an English text or really any non-dead language text, you're working with a translation anyhow. So feel free to retranslate. That's my little soapbox there. Um, okay. Um, so yeah, and exact wording. Sometimes you really do want to really keep that exact wording, and you figure out a way either to make it fit the time signature or say, all right, I need an extra beat in this measure, and that's fine. Sometimes the reason to want the extra beat is musical, like, oh, I want to hang on this word more. I want this word to have more weight. Put an extra beat after it, and there's an extra beat, and that's just the way it is, and that's fine too. There's no rule that says music's got to stay in one time signature, right? That's never been a rule. In fact, back in the Renaissance, it was very common. It's really only as we hit the Baroque that it becomes more expected that you're going to stay in one time signature. But in the Renaissance, meter was barely even a thing. Um, okay, so yeah, I really really enjoyed that piece and talking about it and looking at some of the things that are in it. Um, Aramis. Okay, yeah. So Hebrew, of course, I should have mentioned that. Yeah, and Hebrew as a language has evolved, right? And Aramaic, that's I think the word that you're looking for there. That's the word that I was struggling to find in my head. Aramaic is the English word, I think, for what you're describing there. Yeah, Aramaic. So that's a language that I know a lot of these texts were written in, but I don't know that Francis would have been written in Aramaic. I just, again, I don't know enough about him. Um, uh, so yeah, if you're working with a text that has really specific meaning with specific words, by all means stick to it. But when you have the freedom to make alterations for musical purposes, it's totally expected, totally common. We see it all the time. All right, so what I want to do now is switch gears and look at Dave's contrafact here, because Dave posted this one. So this is now going back to my For Dad song, and where I asked people, yeah, go ahead and try to write your own melody to that chord progression. And so we're going to hear Dave's version of this here. And I'm just going to play it. I've only heard part of it so far, but I'm going to hear the whole thing now along with all of you. right, nice job, Dave. I like it. It's interesting because when it started off, I expected even more jerkiness based on how it started. It actually became less jerky sounding to me as it went along, I think because of the consistency of the rhythms you used. And so, if that's what you're going for, great. Because really, here's if I want to talk about an overall sense of things rhythmically, here's the consistency that's going. There is a lot of variety, but there's consistency within the variety, which I think is a fabulous thing. So, the thing that I'm hearing is a lot of groupings that are basically 16th notes within a beat landing on a longer note. So here, okay, that's 2/16 and an eighth followed by a quarter. But if I describe that as 16ths within the beat followed by long note on the beat, that's my general description here. I can say that has the same description. 16th notes within the beat, within beat 3, followed by long note on the beat. Furthermore, I could say the 16th notes within the beat were mostly on beats 1 and 3, and the long notes were mostly on 2 and 4. I don't know that that's true throughout the piece. It's definitely true in the first measure, and then it's true in the second measure, right? And then third measure, same. Here's the one place now where that gets broken because we 16th notes on beat 4. So that's great. We've created some consistency and then some deviation from that consistency, and then more more deviation from it because now we've lost that 16th note texture. So that's really good. So then the next measure, the next little phrase, we get a similar thing, but here there's not as many of the long notes on the beat. We get little syncopations like this one. So there, the long note isn't on the beat, it's syncopated at the end of the 16th note figure. And we get, a rhythm just like the first one, then another syncopation. Those are syncopations, bum, 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 without the note on the beat, right? So there's a lot of variety within the consistency that you've created. So to me, as I said, as it moved along, it didn't actually feel jerky. It felt like, okay, you've established a consistent rhythm and you're varying within it. That's what I would hope for, right? I like consistent rhythm as a identifying feature for a piece, and I like variation within it. So to me, I think it works. It works well rhythmically in that sense. Um, so instrument change in the music. So yeah, so the subject of the instrument change was one I was going to talk about because Dave was asking about changing the instrument for the chords. And okay, that's not currently supported. If you want to do that, you would want to add a separate staff. Let me just do that. I'll just add another staff. Actually, I have to make it a whole other instrument just because of the way it works. So I'll go ahead and add a piano. Then I'm going to select all my chords here. Right click that guy, all similar elements, copy, and then I'll paste down to my piano staff. And now I'm going to select all these chords, select all similar elements in same staff, and I'll just go ahead and use tools, realize chord symbols. Great. Now I have some chord symbols that I can play with. And now I can go ahead and delete all those chord symbols themselves because I don't want those. So again, select all similar and same staff, hit delete. And then I come over here and turn these off. So I'll select this guy, come over to the inspector, turn off playback, and now I only have the playback that's now going to be piano. Right? And then I can add all the instrument changes I want here so that I can have, pizzicato strings changing to, whatever else later. So anyhow, I wanted to show that process because we were discussing that earlier. But then Joanne's asking about in the melody. So I'm actually going to just undo. Am I going to undo those changes? Yeah, I'm going to I'm going to save a copy of this because I feel like I might want a copy. Saved is what I often do. All right, so there's my saved copy, and all right, I'm just going to go back to the original, actually. Sometimes I use the save a copy command when I think of it because it does exactly what I want. Save that thing as a copy, and then I can get back to the original through undo, but whatever. I've just closed the file and I've reopened it. So what's happening here now is the melody itself is switching between instruments. That's fine. You can totally do that. If you are writing for an ensemble of many instruments, you can totally, have the melody change from phrase to phrase, and in fact, it's a good idea. It's considered good arranging technique to change the texture periodically. Now, the question is, as far as what the specific instruments are: harpsichord, cello, pipe organ, marimba, flute, and harpsichord again. So if you happen to know musicians who play all those instruments, then you can certainly organize a performance of this. Otherwise, it's probably never going to happen. I know, Dave, you've said that that's not your goal normally, so that's fine. But I will say that typically, if you wrote for, say, a string quartet or brass quintet or some well-known instrumentation group, then there are groups out there who would actually say, oh yeah, I could take this music and perform it because we already exist with that exact instrumentation. I spent a fair amount of my time writing music for weird combinations of instruments because, like, when I was directing a jazz ensemble at the school where I teach, Regis University, we didn't have a whole complement of instruments. It was just whoever signed up, and sometimes it would be a flute player and two clarinets and three guitars and a piano, and that was our ensemble. So okay, that's what I arranged for, and so you just never really knew what you're going to be getting, but I would have some oddball assortment like that to arrange for. Now, I will say, when you switch instruments, um, there's um, there's an art to figuring out how to do it in ways that feel natural, and deciding, first of all, if you want that. So first of all, any piece that's in 4-bar phrases like this, and then 8-bar phrases, and then each 8-bar phase is generally broken up into 4-bar phrases. What happens here, having the harpsichord for 4 bars, that totally felt natural to switch right here because that's like the next line of lyric, right? That's the next musical phrase. It started right there on that boundary. I would contrast that, though, with the next but also then the cello picks up those 4 bars. I might be ready for another instrument now because we've established a 4-measure precedent. I'm not saying you would have to keep to it, but it does feel a little odd for the cello to finish one A section and then start the next A section also. It's a little odd. And to change to the pizzicato texture in the middle of that 4-bar phrase. Well, first of all, that's physically next to impossible because you still got your bow in your hand. You don't have time to put it down. So this is another one of those things that, like, to make this actual playable by human musicians, you'd have to orchestrate that a bit differently so that you're not asked to play pizzicato like, milliseconds after you just played arco. You can maybe like pluck one note while still holding the bow, but you're not going to play a whole series of 16th notes because you need all your fingers and you're still holding a bow with 2 of them. So yeah, there's practicalities like that come in, but also from a musical perspective, there's something a little. This is what feels jerky to me, as far as not the rhythms, but the fact that we have a 4-bar phrase in which the last bar is pizzicato, then back to arco in the next phrase, and then changing to organ in the middle of that phrase, right? Because this is one 4-bar phrase here. It's 3 bars of arco, 1 bar of pizz. The next bar is 1 bar of arco, and then 3 bars of organ. So those changes feel random. And to the extent that I hear jerkiness in this, that's actually causing it. So again, if the goal is to have a jerky sound, do that. Have your instrument changes in unexpected places like that, in the middle of phrases. If the goal were to avoid jerkiness, well, that's something you could avoid. It doesn't seem like the goal here. I mean, given the nature of the rhythms, I wouldn't assume that that you wanted to avoid jerkiness. So I think accentuating in this way is definitely good. Um, okay, so yeah, so those rhythms kind of do continue fairly consistently. One of the things that I could also talk about here is the use of scalar lines versus arpeggiated lines. As a whole, this piece is maybe more arpeggiated um, than I might expect. I don't know why I would say expect, but that to the extent that there's something jerky about it melodically, excuse me, it's the extent to which it's driven by arpeggios. So this is a common thing that happens if you start with a chord progression and then try to put a melody to it, and you're not like really experienced at doing that specific thing. It's really easy to do something that you might not have otherwise done, which is write a lot of arpeggios of that chord. And I'm not saying arpeggios are bad, they're going to be a part of most music, but typically there's going to be some balance between arpeggiated passages and scalar passages that is not as much the case here. It's very skewed in favor of arpeggiated patterns, which contributes to some amount of jerkiness, but it also maybe I think you might like the result better if you looked at having more scalar passages. So just because you see a chord symbol, that doesn't mean you can't have a scale, right? It just means you fill in the passing tones between those chord tones. Now, I do have to comment on what's happening here. There's a really nice thing happening here. So this is a really good thing. When you use arpeggios, do this. Do the thing that Dave did here. He has his A minor 7, flat 5, arpeggiated, just plain 1, 3, flat 5, 7. And then he has a D7, 1, and then 7, and then root, and then third. And it's inverted, right? It's inverted in the sense that this is technically it's root position because the D's on the bottom, but the notes on top, I shouldn't say inverted, it's a different voicing. Instead of doing, let me destroy your piece for a second. There we go. Let me play this. Don't do that. Don't just have a root position A minor 7 flat 5, then root position D7, unless you really want some jerkiness. So what Dave's got going on here is really nice in that if you think of this A minor 7 as a chord, let me close up some other music here. If you think about that A minor 7 flat 5 as a chord, which of course it is, but I mean as a block chord, A, C, E flat, G, and then D in the bottom, and then C up here, D, F sharp. If you think of it this way, the voice leading is really nice. This A is leaping down, which that's fine. The bass voice is expected to have the leaps when you do circle of fifths, but the other voices are all moving stepwise, right? The second to top note is keeping a common tone, C to C. The second to bottom note, sorry. Third to bottom note, E flat, is moving by step down to D. The top note, G, is moving by step down to F sharp. If you were to play these as block chords on the piano, you would totally want to do that because you can do that just by shifting your fingers slightly. You don't have to go pick up your whole hand and move it. It's going to feel awkward and sound awkward. Well, the same is true when you arpeggiate. So here he has that same exact thing, but he's got the chord arpeggiated. But that same idea that you connect the notes, I talked about that when we were looking at that Bach piece, right? We were looking at that Bach prelude, and I pointed out how the voice leading worked really, really well. So that's the one spot in that piece. Well, it's not the one spot. There's like this spot here is that passage also is doing that too, but it's easier to do here because the root is staying C the whole time. But yeah, the fact that you kept the C minor to F7 that same way, good job. So in any case, yeah, that is my observation overall, is that the piece is jerkier and maybe not as melodically interesting as it could be because of the predominance of arpeggios. Um, uh, Compared to scalar lines. And if you think back to that Bach prelude, yeah, I can't sing, right? C E G C E G C E. I can sing when I slow down and think about it. I'm probably in the wrong key, but you know the piece. It's all arpeggios, but it's not about just the arpeggios. It's totally about the. It's about the top note of that arpeggio forming an implied melody. So even though it's all arpeggios, there's melodies being formed within it because of that voice leading. So Dave's got that happening here individually when there's two arpeggios next to each other, but the overall effect doesn't have that same type of thing going on. So that would be something, I guess, to kind of consider if you're I don't know, if you're trying to straighten out any jerkiness. That would be something to consider, is just getting some more scalar lines. Because even when it slows down to quarter notes here, really nice. Yeah, this is a nice line. Nice little line there, right? So it's got a step in it, and then an enclosure with that the E flat. Yes, this is a little bit of an arpeggio, but it's a really brief one, right? It's just the two notes encircling the E flat to follow, and that little two-note skip is approached by that common tone, which itself is approached by step. So that's like the section of the piece that has the most sort of traditional melodic aspect to it in that sense. But yeah, it's totally possible to do that with 16th notes, to just, take any of those arpeggios and say, instead of this, it's kind of a cool line. I don't want to mess with that one. But if I wanted to mess with, like here, arpeggio up, arpeggio down, arpeggio up, arpeggio down. How about if I went boop, 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 and then bum, 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 bum. Here we go. So all I did was changed a few of the notes in here to get myself a little more scaliness. And probably I would actually continue with that. Make this be a G, and make this be an E natural. Even though it's an F7 chord, I'm looking at this E as my leading tone into that F. Okay, not necessarily the world's best melody, but that's the idea anyhow. This idea of arpeggiate up, step back down is a pretty typical one. In fact, if I want to arpeggiate up, there's another real typical device here, is let this guy go, instead of 1 3 5 7, let it go 3 5 7 9, 3 5 7 9, and then let this guy step. Uh, Here we go, because that G leads nicely to that same F. Let me hear this guy now. All right, so now it sounds like a jazz bebop line, but not just a jazz bebop line, also Bach. That's how Bach writes lines off. Also, arpeggiated lines followed by scalar lines in the opposite direction. So it's a tried and true voice leading technique to consider. Um, so so Dave, are you saying that there's something about the change of the chord instrument? So did you hear me talk about that earlier? I did show um, how I would do that, and I loaded the version of the score. Well, I made a version of the score in which I went ahead and realized your chord symbols onto another staff, and then I can go to that other staff and add a chord change anywhere I want. Like if I want, after two measures, say, to change to another sound for the playback, I come here, add my instrument change, and then go to the mixer, and open that sucker up. Take my, wait a minute, did I get the wrong channel here? Am I confusing myself? Yes, I am confusing myself. They both say normal. Oh, that's because there's no chord symbols on it. That's right. There's no chord symbols on this channel, so I'm not actually going to be changing the chord symbol channel. I'm going to just change the main channel. So let me collapse this guy again and just change its main channel from piano to celesta. So apparently I made the change at the beginning rather than the middle like I meant. But the point is you can do it. So so yeah, so that's totally doable. So I apparently made the piano sound. Oh yeah, now I see. The first, this isn't harmony channel. This is the before instrument change, after instrument change. Silly me. So yeah, if I wanted to start on marimba and then change to organ, I can do that. Yeah, you can totally do that sort of thing. So, in any case, I've talked about the things that I wanted to talk about here, and going forward, if someone wants to try to do some of this reharmonization stuff, go for it. I definitely encourage you to check out my course to learn some of the standard techniques for it. But by all means, throw whatever you want at the problem and pick a song that you feel like reharmonizing and give it a shot. You can just let MuseScore play the chords, or you can arrange it like I did with that saxophone quartet arrangement. I'll eventually find the video and post it to the community so you can see it. It's fun. But that said, I think I will be getting on with things here. So let me just play you some music to end out here. Thanks everyone for being here for the Music Masterclass. My name is Marc Sabatella with Mastering MuseScore. We do this every Thursday. I talk about some aspect of music that's interesting me at that moment, and I take a look at some of your music and talk about it through the lens of what I just talked about, or whatever feels like it wants to be talked about. So if you got music to submit, by all means, make sure you join the community if you haven't already. It's free. Join, submit your music, post it. Oh, I do want to show you, I just added last week, if you haven't noticed this, the FAQ, how to share your music article, is now visible pretty much everywhere. So that makes it really easy to get there, find that article. And I know Jim had that video. I need to get that happening in there also. Anyhow, hope everyone has a good week. Create some music. Looking forward to hearing your what you all might come up with in the next week, whether it's reharmonization or anything else. And